Let's look at the domain and range of functions. This is out of section 10.1. And if we're given a particular function, let's say we have f of x equals 2x. And you're asked to find the domain. Well, the first thing you want to think about is, remember, your x is your input. This is your input. And then which will be your domain. What can you put in to this function and not get something undefined or get something that's not a real number? Well, as far as 2 times x, you can put any number in. You can put anything. So your domain would be all real numbers. There's nothing that would be undefined. So my domain would be all real numbers. Or you could write it in interval notation, which would be negative infinity to positive infinity. So we could look at all real numbers. So we have negative infinity to positive infinity. The range is a little harder to find without having a graph. Your range is going to be what you get out, your output, when we put in our particular domain. So again, there's our domain. Now we're looking for our range. No matter what number I put in, I'm going to get a real number out, and it could be any real number depending on what your domain is. So your range is going to be from negative infinity to positive infinity, or all real numbers also. We could also write it as all reals. Okay, so and if you think about what this looks like, this is a line, and if I just do a very rough sketch of this, it's a lot easier to tell domain and range from a graph. So if I graph this line, if I put 0 in, I get 0, 0. If I put 1 in, I get 1, 2. If I put negative 1 in, I get negative 2. So we're going to have a line similar to this. And again, remember, if you're looking at a graph, your domain, you look at it going from left to right. So we would be going, and we're going from negative infinity as we see our line going. I'm going to just color it in a little darker here. As we go left to right, it's all real numbers from negative infinity all the way to positive infinity. And then range is you go bottom up, and our function as it goes from negative infinity, because it goes on forever, it goes to positive infinity. So my range is also negative infinity to positive infinity. Let's look at another example of domain and range. So let's say I have f of x equals 2 over 1 minus x squared. And again, we're looking for domain and range. And always think, when you're looking for domain and range, always think all real numbers to start with. And then what could possibly cause undefined area or undefined for this particular function? Well, we know what I'm dealing with, so it's 1 minus x squared. So I need to look, since this is a rational expression, I need to look at the denominator, because as we know, we can't have a 0 in the denominator of a rational function or a fraction. So what that tells me is 1 minus x squared cannot equal 0. Okay, that cannot happen. That's going to cause a problem if we have 1 minus x squared equals 0. So solve this. So I have 1 cannot equal a positive x squared if I move my x squared to the right side. So I'm just moving that to the right side, which would make it a positive. And I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Square root of both sides. And the square root of x squared is x. Square root of 1 is plus or minus 1. So what that tells me is I can have any numbers, because remember, we start with thinking, okay, all real numbers. We're going to think about that. All real numbers, but we do have a problem because we have a rational function. So the bottom cannot equal all real numbers except x cannot be a positive or negative one, because think about that. If I put 1 into my x, that's going to give me 1 squared, 1 minus 1 is 0. If I put negative 1 in there, I'm going to get 1, 1 minus 1, which would be 0. So how would I write this in interval notation? So we do have this, except in interval notation, so we can do everything all the way up to negative 1, not including negative 1. And then we can go from negative 1 to 1, because any number in that interval would work. And then from 1 to positive infinity. So that's how it would look as far as these are our union symbols, saying it's this or that. It can be any one of those three intervals possibly for this particular question.